Hello, I am Dr. Eric Luttrell, and this is the introductory video for English 1302 Writing and Rhetoric for the summer semester. Very important that if you are in a 1302 class for the fall or spring semester, this introductory video will not apply to those classes. This is a 5-week semester during the summer, so the reading material, the assignments are very different than they would be in a 15-week regular semester. If you are in the summer semester, you may be in a slightly different situation than most students would be in a fall or spring semester. Many of you I know have taken 1301 as a high school or for college credit in high school. Also, I know many of you are seniors ready to graduate, and this is one of the credits you need to get that maybe you were intended to get earlier in your academic career, but now you need to get it so you can graduate in the summer or in the fall. And I know many of you may just be taking it so you can get it out of the way. Either way, we're going to have a lot to do in a relatively short amount of time. As I mentioned, the summer semester, it's only 5 weeks, and we've got to compress the credit you get for it is the same as you would if you took it during the 15-week spring or fall semester. So that means there's a lot of material we have to do relatively quickly. I hope you have the time to devote to that during the week. Because it's an online class, you'll be able to pick your schedule mostly as works best for you. There will be some hard deadlines like when your quizzes are due, when the peer review assignments are due, and when the essays are due. But other than that, most weeks you can decide when you have the time available to watch the lecture videos, to do the reading, and do the other assignments, as long as those assignments are done before the due date. I know some of you may be working at the same time. You may be taking other classes. You may be working and taking other classes, in which case you're going to have a lot on your plate. But we do have to learn some core concepts. Also, because this is 1302, it presumes that you've already had 1301, even if that is a credit you got elsewhere at another university or in a high school class that was taught for college credit. But I can't presume that you have all of the background knowledge that 1302 actually requires. So we will be going over some of the core components that are a key part of my 1301 class. So if you have had my 1301 class in the past, you may see some familiar concepts, some familiar readings. I hope those concepts are, or I think those concepts are important enough to review, to do the readings again, even if you've seen them before. And if you haven't seen them before, please be very diligent to try to take those concepts in and learn to apply them very quickly, because you're going to need them in the part of the class that is new to 1302. So I usually ask students at this point of the semester, what ideas do you have about writing? What, sort of assumptions, what sort of emotional reactions pop into your head when you think of taking a writing course? And sometimes it's not even students that, talk about this sort of thing to me. Just the other day, I was at the barber shop, and the barber asked me what I did for a living, and I said, I'm an English professor. And she said, oh, I hate writing. Now, my core focus is on literature, but people usually think of English. Most people who are not English majors think of English as primarily a writing class. And the people who don't like it usually don't like it for the same reason. The ideas that we have about what writing is, what it requires, what the process, what the activity itself is, usually focus on this. They focus on sitting at a blank computer screen and trying to think of something to put on it, some sort of text to put on that screen. You may be thinking about, you may think your assignment is writing something as if you were answering a question on a test, like an essay question on a test where you have a couple of hours to complete it, in which case you're trying to decide, well, what does the professor want me to say? But that is not, that is the activity of writing, but writing as a process is not limited to that. In fact, that is actually one of the later stages of the writing process. When you actually sit down to write something out, if you don't already have in your head not only what you want to say, but who you're responding to, what new ideas you want people, your reader, to acknowledge, and who your reader is. You should not think of me as your primary reader. You're going to, I think it's best to think of yourself as writing for other members of your class or other people that are in your, same stage of life or academic career. The people in the classroom or the people on campus or other people from back home who, if you could talk to them about this issue, how would you describe that? In other words, writing is not something you do on a computer or on paper. It is something you do with other people, the same as if you were having a verbal conversation. Think of writing as a conversation. And in a conversation, you don't usually start the conversation. I mean, that is probably the most difficult part of a conversation is this, sitting next to somebody else who's not talking and thinking, I want to get this person talking. So what should I say? What do we have in common? What do we want to talk about? So that is the part that's roughly comparable to sitting at a blank computer screen. But you don't have to do that. There are lots of conversations out there that have already started, especially when you're writing. You're writing in a response to a conversation that has already been started through other writing or through interviews or videos or something that's already out there. And just like in a conversation, the first thing you need to do is actually listen to what's been said already. Try to figure out what has already been said so you don't need to say it again. And knowing what's already been said, you can then decide, what do I want to say in response to that? So when you finally do sit down at the computer, you're sitting down to respond to the conversation that's already out there. That is a lot easier than trying to think of, how do I start this? How do I start from nothing to bring up an issue and then discuss it? When you talk to someone in a conversation, you try to figure out what they're already talking about, especially if it's multiple people talking to each other, what each one of them already knows, what they don't know, what they believe, what parts of the issue they're focusing on, what concerns them, what they sort of respond to, and what emotion. Are they angry about something or worried about something or excited about something? And what do they think of each other? Do they get along? Does each one think the other one doesn't know something that maybe the other one actually does? Do they feel threatened by each other or the ideas that the other person is expressing? Understand that first, and then you want to add something of your own. But not just anything, not just the first thing that pops into your head. You want to add something that's relevant to that conversation, that's relevant to what those people in that conversation have already targeted. So thinking of writing as part of a conversation helps get us started, helps get us motivated, helps sort of orient us, help us figure out what we do and do not need to say. You don't need to, if you're addressing a particular reader, you don't need to say something that reader already knows. But there is a drawback to the conversation comparison. And that is, in a conversation, you have to think of something on the fly. If you want to cite evidence, you have to remember that evidence. You have to remember it accurately, and you have to remember where it came from. If someone asks you, if you say something is a fact, someone may ask you, where did you learn that? What is your source? Is that the source reputable? Where did that source get that information? That's something that's very difficult, if not impossible, to do in a verbal conversation. That's what we're later going to see defined as BS. People refer to what others say sometimes as bullshit when they just want to dismiss it. But the philosopher Harry Frankfurt has actually written an entire essay, it's in book form, called On Bullshit, where he defines bullshit as when people say something and they're motivated not to communicate accurate information, they're motivated by something else, whether they want to increase their own social status, they want to appear as an expert or as an authority, or they want to manipulate someone else or get someone else to do something. In other words, they're citing information for some other means other than communicating accurate information, and they haven't bothered to figure out if that information is accurate or not. But think about having a conversation in which everything you said was documented. You could cite every source, and you were you had actually gone through the research process to make sure every fact you cited was accurate. I can't think of ever having a conversation like that. But writing allows us to do that. So calling that sort of discussion bullshit might seem a little too harsh, because when we're in a conversation, we are usually motivated to convince someone else of something. And if we can't remember everything exactly accurate, then we might sort of say the best of what we remember. And what we remember may not be accurate. And is that bullshit? most of us would say no. There are a lot of cases in which that's just trying to remember what you need to remember in order to have a conversation. But in that conversation, we often, especially if we disagree with someone or we just want to change their minds, we fall into what's called motivated reasoning. That is when we start with a conclusion. We know what we want someone else to believe that they don't already. And we look for facts, we look for explanations that will move them to that conclusion. But notice in that situation, it's not really a conclusion because it's not at the end of a reasoning process. Presumably, it's a reasoning process we've already gone through, and we're trying to remember what that reasoning process is. But what we're going to find is a lot of times we didn't actually go through that reasoning process. We got that conclusion from other people around us, and we presume that they went through the reasoning process and that it was a conclusion. But then if we ask them, we might find that actually they just got it from someone else. That's one of the things we're going to focus on in the first week when we read about epistemic communities. That is, communities of people who share information and trust that information just because it came from their community, not because they actually know what data or what research process people went through to come to that conclusion. So motivated reasoning is very natural. It's what happens every time there's an argument, but even not a hostile argument, even if it's just saying, let's go see that movie instead of that movie, or, let's spend our collective money on this rather than that. But a lot of the beliefs we have, we feel like have to be defended even if we don't know where they came from. And this is what's called soldier mindset. If you think of defending a conclusion, even the metaphors we use, like defend a conclusion, or attack someone else's position, or undermine an idea, undermine someone else's argument. That literally comes from the days when people were defending a castle from attack, and the people attacking the castle had to dig under the walls. They had to mine under the walls of a castle. All these war metaphors make their way into the terms we use for argument in ways that kind of set us up for this fight idea. Just the word argument, people usually have these connotations that this is me versus you, and one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose. Well, that's soldier mindset. And that's not actually the mindset we want to be in, especially at the beginning of a research process. The opposite of that is scout mindset. And that dichotomy between soldier mindset and scout mindset, you're going to read more about when you read the first chapter of Julia Galef's book, The Scout Mindset. And in the scout mindset, you're out looking to learn something you didn't know already. You're not defending a position. And if you think of this geographically, a soldier might be trying to defend a battle line. And if the enemy moves the soldier back, that is losing. And if the soldier moves the battle line forward, that is winning. But a scout is not going to be anchored to one specific place. A scout wants to explore the entire territory and not be locked into any one particular part of the territory. And most importantly, if the scout is wrong, the scout is not going to defend that wrong position. The scout wants to update his or her map to reflect reality rather than to defend a foregone conclusion. This requires critical reasoning. And you're going to hear words like critical reasoning, critical thinking a lot in college. And you ask 10 different professors to define critical reasoning, you're going to get 10 different answers. But it's very important because most people think of critical reasoning as just being able to criticize ideas that are unfamiliar to them, new ideas. If I hear someone say something I don't agree with, I'm very good at being critical. Well, guess what? Everybody is. My 4-year-old daughter is very good at critical reasoning if it just means arguing against things you don't like or unfamiliar ideas. Critical reasoning requires something a little bit more than that. Critical reasoning is the ability to attempt to falsify a claim even if you already believe it. Falsify is, subjecting something to some sort of test. And in soldier mindset, people like to protect their ideas from any kind of testing. Describe their beliefs in really abstract terms that nobody can disprove because there's no specific facts that it's anchored to. Or for some reason, it's always out of reach for anyone trying to test the actual fact. But critical reasoning says, okay, if my idea is true, here's how it could be proven wrong. Or here's how you would at least test it. And that's going to be very difficult. That's not very intuitive. So we're going to spend the whole first week focusing on the difference between soldier mindset and scout mindset, motivated reasoning versus critical reasoning, and looking to see where our beliefs come from. So that we have to ask ourselves, is this a conclusion of a reasoning process that I've done? Or is this just something I've borrowed from my community? And so we have to ask ourselves this question that's put very well by the writer Monica Guzman in her new book, I Never Thought of It That Way. You have to ask yourself which you value more. Do you value the truth more? And that's the scout mindset. That's critical reasoning. Or do you value your own beliefs? And that puts you in soldier mindset. In other words, my own beliefs are more important than any kind of questioning process. I just want to feel comfortable with what I already believe. I want that feeling of closure that I know all I need to know. And we typically don't like losing that feeling of closure, even if it brings us closer to being accurate. As Guzman puts it, you have to value the truth more than your own opinion if you're going to be open-minded, if you're going to be able to engage in critical reasoning. And that means that you have to have a measure of humility. And with nothing more than these two questions, we can help our minds move from certainty to uncertainty. Now you may be saying, wait a second, I didn't come to college to become more uncertain. I want more certainty. I want more facts. I want to know more. I want to feel more closure, more certainty. But if we feel certain, we're not going to learn anything new. We don't feel like we need to learn anything new. I know all there is to know, so why should I listen to anyone else? Why should I read anything else? Why should I look for new facts that aren't already familiar to me? Well, she's saying we have to actually move from certainty to uncertainty, finding gaps in understanding that help our curiosity catch on. So curiosity is sort of the opposite of that soldier mindset, that need for closure. It is uncertainty that searches for the truth. Uncertainty that searches for the truth gets there to the truth faster than certainty that asserts it. So if you're not curious, if you're not uncertain, you're going to stop looking, you're going to stop learning. And this isn't new. This idea goes back at least 2,500 years to the philosopher Socrates. And Socrates never actually wrote anything himself, but he's described a lot. His conversations, his inquiry quests are described by his pupil, Plato. And Plato wrote a dialogue called the Gorgias, which is all about rhetoric. It's all about, forming an argument. And in that, Socrates goes to ask the teacher of rhetoric, somebody like me, but 2,500 years ago, whose name was Gorgias. And Gorgias says, look, I'm teaching this great tool to people. I'm teaching them this craft that it will help them persuade other people, get more money from other people. So it's not just rhetoric, but also marketing, sales, or public communications, public relations, propaganda. All these sort of things that lead Socrates to ask, well, wait a second, are you teaching them to learn the truth first, or are you just teaching them to persuade other people? To which Gorgias essentially says, well, I'm really mostly concerned with persuasion. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but hey, don't worry about that. The main thing is that you motivate other people to do what you want them to do. He goes so far as to say, Gorgias does, that you will make the experts your slaves rather than learning from the experts. So this is the opposite of what Socrates wants to do. Socrates has been told by the oracle at Delphi that he is the wisest man in Athens, and he doesn't believe that. He says, I'm far too uncertain to be the wisest man in Athens. I need to go out and learn more. So he goes and interviews experts in various disciplines, like Gorgias, who's an expert in rhetoric. And he asks them questions, and most of the time we see that the experts weren't actually ready to answer those questions. These are things that the experts, the people with certainty, didn't actually ask themselves. And then they have that choice. Well, do I want to stop and consider this, or do I just want to shut Socrates up and get rid of him so that I look like an expert, I look like I'm right, even if I'm not? Well, ultimately, the city of Athens decided to put Socrates to death for crimes like corrupting the youth and blaspheming the gods by questioning them. But even writing after the execution of Socrates, Plato holds that attitude up to praise. He has Socrates tells us that Socrates said to Gorgias that if ever there was a man who debated someone else from a desire to know the truth, not to win a debate, not to win an election or make a sale, but as a way to test his own knowledge, he says, if there was ever a man who debated another out of a desire to know the truth of the subject discussed, I am such a man. And he says, I am glad to be refuted if I say anything untrue. In other words, if he's wrong about something and he wins an argument and everyone thinks he's right, well, then not only is he wrong, but everyone is wrong. And he doesn't want to be wrong. He would rather be proven wrong. He would rather, quote unquote, lose an argument or a debate as long as he then has a more accurate understanding of the thing they were discussing before that. So he prioritizes curiosity over closure. He prioritizes critical thinking over motivated reasoning. And we're going to engage in that sort of process. So that thing that you're afraid of in a writing class, the essay, if you're thinking of that as a document, like a blank document that you have to fill up with text that's going to be graded, if that's the only part of the essay that you're thinking about, you're not really focusing on the thing that makes an essay important, that makes it relevant, that makes it an activity that's worth doing, that will benefit you. So it's not just the grade on the essay that's going to be important here, but the process itself. And the word essay originally, if you look it up on and I recommend the Oxford English Dictionary, which is paywalled, meaning you can't get access to it without a subscription. But as a TAMU CC student, you do have that subscription. Just go to the library website, go to the list of journals, and you'll see the OED online is one of the things you can click on. And the Oxford English Dictionary gives you more than just like a definition. It gives you definitions across time, so you can see how the definitions of words change. It's updated very frequently, much more so than many others. But it also gives you an etymology. That is the history of a word. And the word essay, the number one definition for the word essay is probably not the one you're thinking of. I think it's definition number 8, that is like a piece of writing or composition. But the first definition for essay is the action or process of trying or testing. A trial, a test, a proof, an experiment. That might not be what you're thinking of when you think of an essay. And that comes from ultimately the Latin word exaggerate, which means to weigh. So if you think of coming from the Latin, the ancient Romans didn't have a mint to make money. To print out money that was standardized, was made of the exact same weight, of the exact same material. So if someone wanted to pay for something with gold, they could give you a piece of gold. They could even sort of give you a coin that, maybe it came from a mint, maybe it didn't. It might be hard to tell. It's easy to fake. It's easy to make something that looks like gold by mixing a lot more copper and tin, bronze with it, that would be a lot cheaper than the something of the equal weight that is made of gold. So you can't tell if something's gold by looking at it. It could be diluted. You have to weigh it against something that is gold. So by weighing something someone gives you and tells you is gold against something that is gold, then you have a better idea if that is genuine gold or not. So having one thing by itself is never enough to really understand that thing. You have to compare it to something else. And more generally, this is a process of examining something, not just trying to be like the guy like Gorgias, who might try to take a diluted piece of gold that is a little bit gold but a lot of other stuff, and just convince somebody, just get something over on somebody. So if you think of your essay writing as a process of which the document is like an end result or a documentation, your document is a documentation of the thinking process, the process of testing and proving an idea by comparing it to other ideas, then you get a better sense of this is not something you want to sit down and try to do the night before it's due, not the night before the document's due. It is a process of examining ideas, lots of different ideas, comparing them to each other, looking for alternative explanations or things that might be missing in a necessary argument. In this class, you're going to emphasize that process as well as the writing of the essay. And you're going to write 2 essays in here. The second one's actually going to be a revision of the first, but it's not just going to be like, an edit where you go through and fix grammar, things like that. It's going to be, it's going to add a lot of new elements, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So to examine an argument, you're not just looking at the conclusion and deciding if you already agree with it or not. You're going to look at how that conclusion is supported. There's always going to be at least 2 premises to any logical argument. One of them is going to be based in fact. That is, this thing just happened. This event just happened, and we need to decide if we're going to pass a law to prevent other events like that. Well, first of all, we need to understand the specific event, what actually happened. Then the facts themselves don't lead us to a conclusion about what to do about those facts or how to interpret those facts. We have general premises, general rules. We're going to call these warrants. A warrant is a sort of general assumption about how to regard a fact. And there are different types of warrants. The term we're going to use later is stasis. There are warrants that are generalizations about facts that we would use to, determine whether we, how a fact fits into a larger group of facts. There are definitions that we apply to facts. These are going to, how we define something depends on different criteria than whether or not we believe a fact to be true or not. Whether the facts were caused by one process or by another process is a different question than whether or not the facts exist or not. Whether we think one thing is good or not, whether we think that in many cases when we decide on whether to make a new law or something, we have to ask ourselves, what's more important, our freedom, our individual freedom, or safety? So when you think of gun laws, when you think of regulations about what passengers on an airplane can or can't do or can't bring with them, everyone wants freedom to defend themselves or to carry whatever they want in their carry-on a plane. But we also want to be safe. We don't want other people exploiting those freedoms to harm us or others. So we value both freedom and safety, but we may value those in different degrees. So our values, the questions, the criteria they have to satisfy are different. And then we have to agree on all of those things before we can decide on a policy, on a law, on a rule, on what we're going to do about a situation. So I'll get into those. We're going to spend a lot more time sort of understanding the differences between those different types of stasis, understanding the difference between the facts and the warrants. So I don't want to overwhelm you at this point, but I just want to emphasize that there is a structure to an argument. It's not just about your conclusion. It's about all the different steps you have to go through to get to that conclusion. And when it comes to a structure, you may have learned a few, models of argument in the past, most famously or infamously the 5-paragraph essay, which for reasons we'll get to later, it's entirely possible to write a 5-paragraph essay that is completely incoherent and does not prove anything. We're going to learn, if you haven't learned already in my 1301 class or other 1301 classes that teach this model of argument, you're going to learn to write a Toulmin argument. This is named after the philosopher and rhetorician Stephen Toulmin. And in that, Toulmin points out some of the things that we know need to be in an argument, like there's a conclusion. He's going to call that a claim because, as I've pointed out, sometimes our conclusions aren't always the last thing. They're not the concluding element of a reasoning process. That we actually start with them. Either way, your claim needs to be supported by specific data, at least if for no other reason than to prove that this claim is relevant. But there are a lot of other elements that we sometimes forget to add in an argument, that if you write a Toulmin argument, it's going to force you to go through all of those steps and make sure they're present in your argument. So one of those is the warrant. A lot of times we'll just give a lot of data and assume people will follow that data to the same conclusion that we ourselves hold, but we are sometimes mystified when they don't. Well, that's because they're not using the same warrant. We need to make our warrant explicit and realize that warrant might be a logical fallacy. It might be a generalization. It might be a sort of way of thinking that is not very helpful, not very accurate. So you need to spend some of your essay backing that warrant up, saying, here's why this warrant is a good warrant in general. And even if it's a good warrant in general, it might not be appropriate to this specific situation. So that awareness is called the rebuttal. There are going to be some situations which say, yeah, that warrant might be true in some situations, but not in this specific situation. So you want to keep that in mind just in case there is something you don't know about that might make your warrant irrelevant in the situation. So you can add a qualifier and say, well, if the situation has this criteria, then this claim is justified, and then you give your claim. Now, your essay doesn't have to go in this order, but it needs to have these 6 elements. And we'll talk a lot. We'll spend an entire week looking at these elements, and I'll add a few case studies, some videos I have already, some that I'll add that will provide examples of this. But you'll have to think about, okay, if I want to make my argument, what data am I going to use as evidence, and what warrant am I using to get from that data to the claim, and that sort of thing. Now, in the sort of Socratic ideal, the main purpose of the Toulmin argument isn't just to make your argument clear to other people, it's to make it clear to you, so that you're actually doing like Socrates and making it easy for your opponent to find things to shoot down. Now, You can think of it as like sort of putting an archery target on the different elements of your argument, making it easy for the debater, your opponent, to say, not only, they might disagree with your claim, but they might not really follow your argument. So it might be actually hard for them to disprove your argument if they don't really quite follow it. So you're saying, okay, my argument falls apart if this data isn't what I say it is. So you're going to make that data explicit, you cite the sources. Also, my data might be accurate, but I might be using an invalid warrant. So I'm going to make my warrant explicit, and I'm going to let my opponent see what it is and decide, if there's any, or see if they can find any weaknesses in that warrant. And I'm going to let them. I'm going to sort of play the opposition when I formulate my rebuttal and say that my whole argument might fall apart if this one thing I don't know about turns out to be true. So you're actually making your argument easier to disprove in a Toulmin argument. That is because your motivation has to be critical rather than motivated. You have to be in soldier mindset, in scout mindset rather than soldier mindset for this to even be relevant. Because your goal is to make sure your claim is as accurate as possible, and you're getting your opponents to help you look for weaknesses in that argument, because if together through this debate process you can find weaknesses and improve that claim to make it more accurate, then everybody wins. It's not, one side wins or the other side wins. But of course, we don't always feel that way. And I say feel, at a very, very deep level here. We don't like it when our beliefs are shot down, are disproven. We don't like to lose if we think of it as like this person pointing out something that I said that's wrong. And some of the beliefs that we hold, we would rather, we don't like being disproven, but okay, well, I'd rather be accurate. So, as I said, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and, old research used to show that, or at least, sort of pseudoscientific speculation used to argue that if kids learn to read at a really young age, that's going to show that they're going to be really intelligent later in life. But more rigorous scientific research has not shown that to be the case. It's just, one thing is not really connected to the other. Reading is just one skill out of many, and there's a lot of skills you didn't learn at a young age that you learn at a later age. Things like Thomas Edison didn't actually invent the light bulb. That's something most of us, may have learned in school, although, basically every element of Edison's bulb was an adaptation from incandescent bulbs that had been produced by other people. He was just really good at marketing it. When you learn those sorts of facts, you might go, I didn't know that. It doesn't really bother you that much, although, if that happens in an argument, then it might be kind of embarrassing. But there are other beliefs that are tied to our political beliefs, our religious beliefs, our, national, sort of patriotic beliefs that we have, that even when we're confronted with counter evidence, even when we see the evidence that disproves that belief, we just feel this sort of revulsion, this anger, this defensiveness. And if you don't see that in yourself, you can at least see it in other people, because it's harder to see in yourself. It's easier to see in other people. And that's not a character flaw. That is something that all humans feel. The research by Jonas Kaplan, Sarah Gimbel, and Sam Harris. Sam Harris is the podcaster and author you may have heard of already. When they did this study, they were following up on sort of speculations and observations that people had made in the past about how some identity-based beliefs cause people to become much more emotional. Well, they tested people in an fMRI machine, a brain scanner, that saw what parts of the brain became more active. Like all the brain's active all the time, but the fMRI looks to see where blood flow is increased in the brain under a certain situation. And when you learn that Thomas Edison didn't actually invent the light bulb, there's a little bit of activity in your prefrontal cortex. That is the part of your brain that does math equations. And, when you have to, when you're on your drive home, your usual route is maybe blocked and there's a detour. You have to decide, okay, well, there's too much traffic there, so I'm going to come up with another route. You're just sort of rethinking something, but there's not a lot of emotion attached to it. But when someone tells you that your beliefs about gun violence are not based on facts, or that your beliefs about American history overlook certain information, here's some information that contrasts with your beliefs about your particular identity group. then the parts of your brain that become more active are the same parts that become more active when you're faced with like a physical threat. Sarah Gimble compares it to being confronted with a bear in the woods. This isn't just new information that improves your understanding. It is perceived as a threat to you personally and to your group, because probably your group, your epistemic community, believes this. Challenging that belief feels like a challenge to the sort of safety of the group. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about safety these days, even when it comes to ideas. That is a very natural reaction, but it's one that puts us in soldier mindset, and it makes it very difficult to remain in scout mindset. So after we learn to put together a very sort of rational, self-critical argument, we're going to have to be able to, for ourselves and when we're addressing other people, when we're telling other people that they're wrong, and we can prove that they're wrong, but just showing them the data we realize is not necessarily going to change their minds because it might put them in soldier mindset. We're going to need another strategy. This is why you're going to write a Toulmin argument, but then you're going to revise it to take the form of what we're going to call a Rogerian argument. This is named after the psychologist Carl Rogers. And we're not going to change our conclusion. This is not saying, well, we're still attacking a belief about the truth, but we're not attacking the person. We want to make it clear that we're not insulting the person or their group, that we're not disrespecting them. It's just this belief that they have, not them. So we have to separate the people from the idea in order to have this debate for the benefit of everyone. That also means we need to separate ourselves from our own ideas, and say, if this belief I have is wrong, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person or I'm a wrong person. So the sort of quick version that the rhetoric theorist that you're going to read, we're going to read an essay by Carl Rogers. We're also going to read an essay about his sort of strategy by Young, Becker, and Pike. And Young, Becker, and Pike describe the Rogerian argument this way. They say, first we have to convey to the reader that we're trying to disprove that they are understood. We have been listening to them. They have spoken or written in this conversation in the past. We're going to listen to them now, or we're showing them that we've listened to them. And then we're going to delineate an area within which the reader's position could be valid. This is, that rebuttal, that realizing that they might be using a warrant that is accurate. It's just that it doesn't apply to this particular situation. Or their beliefs about the facts might be accurate, but the warrant they're using might not be valid. But then we're going to introduce to them that, we're the same morally. We're not going to say you're an evil person, you're a bad person because you don't have this belief that I have. We're not going to do that. Even if you believe it, that's not going to help. Nobody's going to change their mind because you say you're a bad person. They're not going to say, oh, I guess I'm a bad person, I should change. So we're going to show that, we're both good people trying to get to the truth. And here's one little adjustment that will benefit not only me, but also you. It's not an argument that I'm going to win and you're going to lose. It's an argument where we're both going to be better off. So very important, we're avoiding polemics. That is where you say, one of us is evil and one of us is good, or, you either, accept this conclusion or you accept that conclusion. You can't adjust either one. So we want to avoid polemics. We want to avoid straw man arguments. That's where you sort of make up a fake and really stupid sounding argument for the opposition and say, anyone who believes this conclusion must have this really stupid argument. In which case, they're going to know what their argument is. So you're not going to convince them that their argument is actually something it's not. But it's also not this sort of false balance, or what's sometimes called both sidism, where we say, well, the people who believe the earth is round are right about some things and wrong about some things. And the people who believe the earth is flat, they're right about some things and wrong about some things. You're not going to say the flat earth theory and the round earth theory are equal or whatever else. You're not saying, well, both of our conclusions are equally true. You're not doing that. You're saying parts of your argument, some of your premises are true, but all it takes is one wrong premise to lead to a different conclusion. Just like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If one link in a chain is weak, then it doesn't matter how strong the other links in the chain are. The argument's the same way. Only one premise has to falter, has to be either invalid or inaccurate, and then the entire argument can be lost. So you can validate the strong links in the chain, the strong premises, before you then point out the one weak link. This is all thinking of argument as a conversation and thinking of writing as if you were face to face, sitting across a table from that person who you're disagreeing with. this is one thing that's really hard to do. This is why online conversations go toxic so quickly, because people forget that they're talking to other people. So many of the areas of your brain that are sort of processing, facial cues and voice tone and that kind of thing aren't available, and it's really hard to empathize with people when you're not face to face with them. So we're going to try to make writing as much like a face to face conversation as possible, while holding on to the time it takes to write, and that means that you have more time than you do in a conversation to do your research, to be really careful about where the facts come from, to examine your own argument, and to revise it to be as accurate as possible. So those are the main components we're going to try to bring together in a relatively short 5-week term here. Exercise the scout mindset. Think of the argument as a conversation, but still rigorously test our own arguments. We're going to do that with the Toolman argument, but then after we perfect that Toolman argument to make sure it's accurate and logically valid, then we're going to go back and revise it to to sort of make sure that we're actually communicating with someone else rather than arguing at them, or just sort of throwing an argument at them. We're not trying to win so that someone else will lose. So that revision is going to be a very involved process itself. Now, how are we going to do this? I'm going to, in the next video, I'm going to talk about how you're going to interact with Blackboard to find out what needs to be read, what quizzes are due when the peer review assignments are due, how to submit your essays and that sort of thing. So be sure that after this you watch that video.